Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the East Lindsey series. This is the biggest district in Lincolnshire, containing 188 civil parishes. Without further ado, here's today's offering. Welcome back to East Lindsey again, people, and to people in Grimsby for the second of this little run I've got up here. We're beginning this episode outside a big white house. That is the old vicarage in this place, which means we can't be far away from a church, and we're not. Just a couple of steps that way is the grand tower of the church you'll find here in Tetney. The East Lindsey series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop, located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like, and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Tetney, Tate's Island. Here's a village which really doesn't need to do much to put itself on the map. There's so much to Tetney it's unbelievable. Located on the A1031, the coastal road from Cleethorpes to Mablethorpe, Tetney sits just to the west of the Prime Meridian, and it's teeming with history, although a lot of it is fairly recent. Once an island surrounded by marshes, a fact that's reflected in its name, Tate's Island, over the past couple of centuries this village has been important industrially, mainly for two reasons. First, it was a vital point on the Louth Canal, which ran from Louth for 11 miles to the North Sea at Tetney Haven. Built in the 1770s, it required 8 locks to cope with the various altitudes of the Lincolnshire landscape, and thus Tetney Lock was constructed east of the village. More recently, Tetney was and still is important for the storage and distribution of oil. Since 1971, via the Tetney monobuoy, the commodity has been delivered to the Humber Oil Refinery at South Killingholme. On that same theme, there was also a heliport here, which transported people to the North Sea oil rigs, but that's now defunct. And speaking of people, several famous ones have lived here. To name drop a few, they include the singer Ella Henderson, weather presenter Keeley Donovan, and the comedian Roy Chubby Brown. Let's go! We begin our walk around Tetney at the Fountains Nursing Home on Church Lane. A traditional care home, this offers single-room accommodation with ensuite facilities for up to 45 residents on 2 floors. All of its rooms have some attractive views of the gardens too. To be honest though, if you're a resident of the care home, you'd probably get just as much enjoyment from the village you're in. Tetney is one of the most sought-after villages in the vicinity of Grimsby. That's why famous names often settle here, including comedian Roy Chubby Brown, who moved here from Howerby. Here's the church, which is dedicated to St Peter and St Paul. It dates back to 1363, a fact which is backed up by an inscription on a pillar in its north arcade. It also states who was responsible too, the vicar of the time, Robert Day. Despite that, some parts of the building are from an earlier church which stood on the same spot, including a doorway which dates from about 1280. The oldest part is the wall of the south aisle, built by Ivo Tallboys, the lord of the manor in Doomsday times. The church is listed, and so too is this 14th century cross. The church is Grade 1, the cross is Grade 2. There are some notable buildings right next to the church. Just about in shot here is one called the Coach House, but it's the one next door that I was more interested in. This is Tetney's former church hall, which has now been split into two separate private dwellings called Grafton House and Altyre House. The latter is the one on the right with the apex roof. Although now residential, the lack of a church hall is not a problem for Tetney. As communal buildings go, it still has them. A little later we'll see the village hall and the local pub, which are both vibrant hubs of activity. Thoresby Road next. This brings us to the old school. Originally Wesleyan and built in 1856, this became a council school and could hold up to 152 children. Not bad for a building that looks pretty small. This would eventually be replaced with a new school on Humberston Road, which we'll come to later. Much like the rest of School Lane, it's now residential. Now at the end of this road, I was met with a house which resembled some sort of museum, given the strange artifacts in its garden. It's actually a local business called Dave's Bargains, a true Aladdin's cave of pretty much anything and everything. Next door we have the Methodist Church. Dedicated to St John, this was Wesleyan when it was first built back in 1818. It was then rebuilt on the same site in the 1870s, and it's still going strong today. Tetney also had a primitive chapel too. It was built on the Green in 1835 before being replaced by North End Chapel in 1856. We're off to find North End now. I'm sure already you can see why people want to live here, and we're not even halfway around yet. Another famous name to have done so is BBC Look North weather presenter Keeley Donovan, who was born in Grimsby but grew up here. Okay, that's brought us to the shop, and as you can see here in Tetney, it's a branch of Spa. This is halfway up our next road. Tetney's quite a long village. When you look at the map, there's like a cluster of buildings at the bottom of the village, and then at the top you've got another cluster, and in between there's like a long stretch, and that's what we're doing now. We're heading up past the shop along this long stretch. We'll turn around at the top and then come back down the other side. It's a nice circular walk this. Still plenty to see here too. We're used to roadside stalls, but I've never seen one selling jigsaw puzzles before. Here though, you can pick one up if that's your thing. For quite a while now, Tetney becomes residential. North End is all about housing and accounts for way over 50% of the village's population. While we're on the subject of residents, we should mention Tetney's most famous daughter. Singer Ella Henderson was born here in 1996 and shot to fame in 2012 after competing in the 9th series of the hit ITV talent show The X Factor. Despite not winning it, Henderson still has 2 studio albums to her name. North End is a nice mixture of property as far as age goes. It's not all modern. In fact, at points through this central section I was quite thankful for my map, because it's a bit of a maze, with some tight narrow streets and plenty of cottages with what I'd call curb appeal. Quite charming houses in all honesty. Holton Road is a little different. It's a bit more on the modern side, but it still felt welcoming and downright lovely. Let's see what you think. I'll take a little break at this point. Here's a montage of the rest of North End, and I'll see you on North End Road in a short while. Well, there can be no denying that the north end of Tetney is definitely a kind of a maze. You need to know where you're going because there's narrow lanes and streets and paths all over the place. That's why I plan a route before I walk around anywhere. Now we're going to walk down North End Road here and we're going towards the school. So we're back into the landmarks now. We're starting to make our way back towards the beginning. Our next job is to get the parish notice board out of the way, and we can do that here. We're still in a residential area, but North End Road is not too far away from an important piece of Tetney history. North of here, on the road to Humberston, is a former Marconi beam station from which telegrams were sent to Australia and India as part of the Imperial Wireless chain in 1927. The station, now a small industrial area, established the first radio link between the United Kingdom and Australia. Only the bases for the masts now remain. Humberston Road also has some new builds, and also the school. Tetney Primary School has undergone a great deal of change over the past few years. In 2018 it was rated good by Ofsted, but in 2016 things couldn't have been different. Pupil numbers were down, staff morale was low, and parents were losing confidence in the school. It seems to be thriving now though. Over the road we have a small cemetery, opened when the churchyard at St Peter and St Paul's became full. There's at least 814 people buried here, but it still has plenty of room for new burials. New interments can only take place between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. during school term time. At this point you can get to the village green in two ways. One is to follow Humberston Road, the other is to use Hillstead Close, through which a public footpath runs from North End Road. This was my original route, but I opted to change it, otherwise I'd have missed the next landmark. Over the road we go, and via a stile we're on the playing fields. These include a cricket pitch and a football pitch, and until recently there was also a grass tennis court too. Tetney's local football club were based here at one time, but they now play in a different village. More on them in an upcoming episode. Now, it's not unheard of to find a public toilet block in a village like this, as we know, but it is rare. Tetney has one, and it can be found right outside the village hall. The building you see before you has two main rooms, one a large hall and the other a smaller annex, suitable for anything from small meetings to children's parties and weddings. The hall is not owned privately, instead it belongs to the residents of the village, but it is managed by the Tetney Playing Field and Village Hall Association. This last section takes us into the village centre, better known to the locals as the marketplace. This is the Plough Inn. This has recently had a magnificent makeover, giving it a colour scheme that reflects the owner's fascinating career. Howard Wilson travelled the world building aquariums for the rich, and the aquatic colours on display at the Plough are a nod to his passion for sea life. And speaking of fish, you might well smell some cooking at this point as well. This is AJ's, a very popular fish and chip shop literally right opposite the pub. In fine weather, you can enjoy food from there on this bench on the green, erected for VE Day celebrations. A nice central spot for such a thing. And by the way, as the name Marketplace suggests, Tetney once had one. A charter was granted to the village by King Edward I in 1282. It was held on Tuesdays, but not here. Instead, it was at the manor. After passing the Empress, which is a Chinese restaurant, one final area remains. These are the Jubilee Gardens, which contain the War Memorial. It's a granite obelisk that remembers those lost in World War II. There's also a plaque here at ground level which confirms Tetney's status as one of the best kept villages in Lincolnshire in 2012. And once you get beyond the War Memorial and that little garden in front of it, there's then this beautiful green that's got another parish notice board, which I might leave a card on as well in a moment. And then you're effectively back to the junction at the beginning, just after the church, just there. To the right is where we turned at the very beginning of this episode, and that's taken us all the way around Tetney, and what a lovely little village this is. It's fabulous, absolutely love it. We're not done with this episode just yet though, because out to the east there's also a secondary settlement that's called Tetney Lock. Between the two there's something big and industrial. Let's cover them both. But first we've got to mention a couple of other things about Tetney itself. One thing we've yet to discuss is Tetney Golf Club, which occupies an expanse of land to the west of the village. Just a few years ago it hit the headlines thanks to something which was found in a pond. So before we reach Tetney Lock, here's a bit about the club, what was found, and what eventually happened to it. Tetney Golf Club has quite a storied past. It was originally farmland, but the Caswell family, who have farmed the area for years, opted to turn part of their land into a golf course in 1994. It's an 18-hole, par 71, 6,151 yard course, and it's pretty successful all in all. Now, if you're a golfer, you'll know yourself there are always hazards to watch out for, usually things like bunkers, water, or the rough. Back in 2019 though, if you played this course, you also had to avoid a 4,000-year-old coffin. Whilst routine maintenance works were being carried out on a pond, the coffin, which was initially thought to be just a soggy log, was discovered. In terms of size, it was about the same as the average telephone box. Carved from a single piece of oak, it was packed with yew or juniper leaves to cushion the body of a man who was buried with an axe which was still perfectly preserved. It was believed to have been a symbol of the man's status. Only 12 such axes have ever been found in Britain. The coffin was transferred to a cold storage unit at the Mary Rose Trust in Portsmouth to prevent it from crumbling before a team in York carried out some analysis. Their work confirmed the contents of the coffin and was also able to tell us a bit more about its history. It had been originally covered in a burial mound of the type we've encountered loads of times before. The mound though was eventually claimed by the sea, making this find all the more remarkable. The land would later be reclaimed and turned into the farmland which the Caswells would go on to own. The coffin and axe are now on display at the Collection Museum in Lincoln. There are two other things I also want to highlight via a few pictures, but both of these are more associated with Tetney Lock. One of them is a wind farm at a place called Bishopthorpe, right on Tetney's boundary with Humberston. Ordnance survey maps from the 1920s show an agricultural tramway once ran from the Humberston Road through Bishopthorpe to Low Farm. Such tramways often used World War I narrow-gauge trench railway equipment to allow year-round access to the soft fenland fields. Those would become the wind farm that stands there today. And right on the coast are Tetney Marshes, which cover over 1,500 hectares of mudflats, salt marsh, dunes and saline lagoons that form an important part of the Humber Estuary Site of Special Scientific Interest. Administered by the RSPB as the Tetney Marshes Nature Reserve, it functions as a grazing marsh where lagoon sand shrimps and little terns are often found. To go with them, there's also a second reserve called the Tetney Blowwells, artesian springs that flow from an underlying chalk aquifer south of the village. They were used to supply a watercress farm from 1948 until 1961. The nature reserve is also a habitat for the cardinal beetle and the Dorbenton, or waterbat. The first thing you see as you approach Tetney Lock are a collection of huge cylinders off Tetney Lock Road. They belong to an oil terminal which stores it for the Humber Oil Refinery at South Killingholme. Oil reaches Tetney from the North Sea via something called the Tetney Monobuoy. It's a permanent structure in the Humber estuary through which oil is offloaded from ships. Once it arrives here, it's then pumped via a pipeline to South Killingholme, where it's turned into products like petrol and diesel. These are then exported by ship from Immingham Dock and transported to inland customers by road, rail and another pipeline. If you want to learn a bit more about the refinery, the South Killingholme episode is linked in today's end screen. Tetney Lock used to have a second landmark which was oil related. Run by Bristow helicopters, it was a heliport which transported personnel to oil and gas rigs in the North Sea. Now though, it's something rather different. Operational for less than a decade, opening in 1965 and closing in the early 1970s, the heliport's hangars were converted into a turkey farm. Now we're coming into Tetney Lock itself. Here there's a former primitive Methodist chapel on Newton Marsh Lane. This was built in 1864 and served the area until the 1950s. It's now a house. To be honest though, it's a minor landmark here. Tetney Lock's very name gives you a huge hint as to the biggest and most historic one there is here. This is the Louth Canal, which runs for 11 miles from the town of Louth to Tetney Haven at the mouth of the Humber. It was authorised by Act of Parliament in 1763 and was completed in 1770 by civil engineers John Grundy Jr. and James Hoggard. It is essentially a canalised version of the River Ludd. Although Tetney had a wharf, most goods transported on it came from Louth. We'll meet this canal several times in future episodes, so we'll learn what they were in due course. As well as being a canal, it also acts as a drainage channel for Lindsey Marsh and as a feeder to Covenham Reservoir. Overlooking the canal is Tetney Lock's pub, the Crown and Anchor, a convenient watering hole for lovers of outdoor pursuits. Indeed, a lot of cyclists often stop here as they travel down the coast road. We can walk down a footpath alongside this pub which will take us to the former Tetney lock. The canal had 8 locks along its length, designed to cope with altitude differences out here. Tetney was the final straight-sided lock, but the canal is no longer used by boats. Therefore, now in its place is a sluice with rising sector gates. It protects the area from high tides using 2 sets of pointed doors. So there you go, that is Tetney Lock, literally, and the Louth Canal. You can get a bit closer to the lock than that. You can see there's a path down there where that guy's just walking his dog. Not quite sure if that was in shot or not, but there was somebody there with a dog just seconds ago. So you can get a bit closer to the lock than where we are here, but I don't think there's really much point. You get a good view of it up here, and you can just carry on walking straight down the canal bank. You know, I don't know where it ends, but I imagine it ends somewhere near the coast, doesn't it? I'm sure the local people will know that better than I do. But anyway, what a lovely place and what a lovely parish Tetney is as a whole. And we are done with Tetney. Although definitely an out-of-the-way kind of place in the grand scheme of things, it stands as a prime example of a village whose historical background should certainly be explored. Next week, we're off to a much bigger village which has the former Tetney railway station within its boundaries. See you later. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.